So start recording. And it appears to be working. Are we ready to learn about ethics today? This will help us with our little mini essay if you're still not finished with it. Let's make sure my pen works. Oh yeah. So yeah, today is about assumptions, ethics, and piracy. So we're going to apply it to a fun little computer science-y topic towards the end of the lecture. But we got to get a few things out of the way first. So let me adjust my own brightness. Let's first talk about arguments and assumptions, because one of the things about critical thinking in this class is I'm going to teach you how to make a good argument, right? So let's study up on that a little bit. Talk about arguments and assumptions. So I'm going to help you try and answer this question to yourself. How can I critically assess an argument? Maybe I'm arguing against somebody or I'm reading an article. I want to know, is whatever this person is trying to convince me, is that correct? Should I believe them? Or if I'm trying to make an argument to you, is it a good one? Is this the one that I should be using when I'm fighting against you in the debate club or whatever? Okay, so I first want to just say, if you have an issue with somebody's argument and they're arguing with you, you can't just say, oh, you're wrong, you suck, something like that, because that's not real, right? That's not a good retort. That does nothing. That's not like bashing down their argument. That's bashing down them. That makes no sense, right? You have to give what's called a counter-argument, an argument against their argument, yes? And one nice thing that you can attack about somebody's argument is the assumptions that it's making, because maybe those are not good assumptions. They should not have been made, okay? So let's just go to the dictionary. What does it mean to assume something, right? An assumption is just something that you're taking for granted when you're arguing. And it's usually unsaid. That's what it means to be an assumption, right? It's usually implicit. And you have to think about that. So this is what I want you to think about explicitly now. Okay, so like, here are my silly examples. So if I buy a birthday candle, because it's almost my birthday, then the manufacturer is assuming, right, I'm not going to try and use that candle underwater because it's definitely not going to work, right? I want to have a pool party and light my candle inside of the pool. That's never going to happen. And I can't sue the manufacturer of that candle for making a horrible candle, right? A silly candle that's not going to work underwater. If only I had like a little blowtorch and a little, maybe like a canoe, maybe it might work. But that is the manufacturer's assumption, right? That's an assumption that is valid to make. Next example. If I make a dinner reservation at a restaurant, like I want to go out to eat, then the assumption of that restaurant is that I will show up on time and give them money. That's the whole point of having reservations, right? Otherwise, like, why have them at all? That is the assumption of the restaurant. They're assuming that I show up. And so this is also valid for arguments. So let's say, like, you see me standing in the little roundabout near campus, and I'm holding up a sign that's saying that I support a ban on parakeets running for office in the United States because, I don't know, that's your job to figure that out. So you can assume a few things about me if I'm standing on a street corner holding a sign with a parakeet picture and an X through it saying that I do not want parakeets running for office. So your first assumption, which is maybe the most correct, is that I am insane. But there are also other assumptions that you could possibly make. And I want you to get the ability to enumerate all of these different possibilities in your mind, because that's what helps you knock down an argument, okay? And to make good arguments yourself. So another possible argument against my silly example is, or another possible assumption for my silly example is that maybe I really hate parakeets. They have wronged me in the past. I want to make sure that no parakeet is ever ruling over Fresno County or something, okay? Final possibility is maybe there is some sense to what I'm doing. Like, why would I be picketing outside if there weren't a reason? So maybe there's some kind of law that allows parakeets to run for office or does not explicitly disallow it, right? Otherwise, I would be wasting my time standing outside in 105-degree weather supporting a ban on parakeets. So those are three possible assumptions. I'm sure you could come up with others. But are there any questions about what this means? Like, a lot of these things are unsaid. Like, if you see me standing on a street corner, these are all unsaid things. They're implicit. They're possibilities. They are assumptions. Okay? Does that make enough sense? So with that, I want you to try. So here is my example that I stole off of the internet. I'm going to let you get into little peer instruction groups and give you a chance to do it. So please also sign in for attendance. I'm going to stop that once we're done with our BiClicker question as well. Okay? So go to the BiClicker page and say hello to the people sitting next to you. Work together to solve this question. So here are the 2 bullets. I'll read them to you and then send you off. So Senator Franklin is apparently a member of the Orange Party, and the Orange Party supports increased military spending by the federal government. All right? And then the second line here is that Franklin will surely vote for a cut in spending on social programs. So there's kind of, this is the first sentence, this is the second sentence. This is what's being argued, right? Franklin will surely vote for a cut in spending on social programs. And so these are somehow connected, these 2 sentences in some way. That's an argument, right? So here's what I want you to think about as a group. This argument assumes which of the following, and just assume that there are only these 5 options, all right? Pick the best one. So which of these 5 explains this argument? What is this argument really assuming deep down? All right? So take a few minutes, try that, and make sure to sign in for attendance as well. All right. I'll give you one. Let's try 3 minutes to start. This is subtle, isn't it? What's the best one? What's the best assumption that's being made here? Take another minute to think about it. All right, that's my timer. Do we have a good idea of what the answer is? Or at least we've convinced the members of our group. Do we all agree? So get your answer in. Take another couple seconds if you haven't already. And then, has everybody done attendance as well? Yell at me right now if you have not. We're all good with attendance? Sweet. That's efficiency. So yeah, give you till 5 minutes exactly, and then we'll take a look at what we got. Okay. Oops. Oh, look at us. We're thinking B. Very nice, but we're not all convinced. B is the right answer, so good job. If you got that one, let's talk about the others. So first of all, this argument needs to be considered in full, and that's going to break down some of these options as well. Like this sentence was said before this sentence. There was a reason for that, right? So it's kind of like there's a link between sentence 1 and sentence 2, where sentence 2 is the final argument, okay? So can anybody tell me why A is not the right answer? Somebody who didn't pick A. Why'd you cross that one out? Elected officials always support policies endorsed by their parties. Yeah. They don't always go along party lines. That is true. That's a very valid assumption. Yes, elected officials always support policies endorsed by their parties. But if that were true, does that even explain the argument still, even assuming that? I don't think it does, because what were we told that Senator Franklin supports? Military spending. What was the argument about? Social programs. We have no clue how the Orange Party feels about social programs. Do you see how A doesn't link those two at all? That's the real problem. There's no link there. Maybe if this line was saying, like, Franklin will surely vote for a increase in military spending, then A is the right answer, right? But no, there's no link. All we know about the Orange Party is that they support increased military spending, and that's what Senator Franklin is part of. Okay, why not C? Senator Franklin agrees with the policies of his party. Yeah, that's the whole problem with A all over again, isn't it? It's not linking those two bullets. Why would you even say this sentence before this one? It says nothing about social programs. All we know about his party is that it cares about military spending. No clue about social programs. There's no link again. All right, I'll do the last two. The Orange Party has the majority in the Senate. That means nothing about how Franklin will vote. You don't have to vote a certain way depending on your majority. I don't think it's affecting anybody in our Congress. They still vote the way they want to vote, right? No link again between those two bullets. Then finally, Senator Franklin opposed federal spending on social programs. This is a good option because it finally talks about this end of the argument, the real argument about social programs, doesn't it? But what does it fail to do? Yes, it doesn't say anything about this first bullet, so why would you waste your breath if this was the real answer? Why would you tell me anything about this at all if E was possible, right? It's not the best answer because of that. It does not link those two sentences. Why would you give me two sentences when you could have just told me this? Why would you tell me about military spending? And I think that should help us figure out why B is the answer if we weren't yet convinced. The only way to increase military spending by the federal government, because that's what Senator Franklin wants, because he's a part of that party, then we should be cutting spending on social programs to achieve that. That's the only possible answer because it's the only thing that links these two bullets. Does everybody see that? Does that make sense? Let me see why no other option is a good option. That's important. This is going to get easier for you as the semester progresses, I promise. All right, yeah, so we found that link. Any last questions about that before I switch topics to ethics, which will help with our essay? All right, so let us talk about ethics. And I told you last time when we talked about the trolley problem and all those fun things, there is no right answer to an ethical question. It's a question of what is good, what is right. And if there is no right answer, then how in the world can we get at a answer? Is there any option for us? Is there a good answer at the end of the day for an ethical question? And the answer is, of course, yes, you can answer these. It all depends on how you feel about these things. But there is a way to make a bad argument and a good argument about your ethical question. So I'm going to give you some, I'll call them standard viewpoints, some ways that people like to think about ethical questions. And that will help you break down the question itself and hopefully come up with the right answer, or the answer, I guess, that you are comfortable with. Okay? It helps people consider whether something is good or ethical. All right? Before we get into ethics, again, I just want to stress that there really is no right answer. So when I ask you to write something in this class, if I give you a question that is an ethical question, then I don't care what you argue, because there is no right answer after all, right? Instead, I just want you to argue whatever you thought was right correctly. Argue it well, okay? And we're going to talk about what well means in this class, right? Also, however I feel about a topic does not matter in regard to your grade or anything else in this class, okay? My opinions on any topic we discuss do not matter, and you can argue the exact opposite thing in an essay, assuming you know what I think, and as long as you do the right thing, as long as you argue your point well, you're getting 100%. I'm not going to get mad or anything. I can promise you that, okay? And with that, I just want to make it clear that I will try as best as I can to be impartial about all the topics that we talk about. I'll try to give both sides. But sometimes my opinions might be too strong to contain, and then you'll know what I think. But again, it doesn't matter on an essay. The whole point of this class is to figure out how to attack an argument, how to see both sides. Okay, so I'm going to give you practice with that. Okay, so that is my promise to you, and I intend to keep it. All right, so let's talk about ethics. Ethics is the study of doing the right thing. It's a very, very old kind of science, okay? Very, very old, I guess it's a section of philosophy. Sub-branch of philosophy is what it really is. So I'm going to show you, again, a bunch of different standard viewpoints that people use to look at or frame ethical questions, all right? So a lot of words today. A lot of new words to us, maybe, if we haven't taken a philosophy class before. So the first kind of ethical theories are called deontological theories. That's a fun word. And these theories have to do with some sense of duty. And there is a root there. Like, I think this D part comes from the word duty in some language. And these kinds of theories say that no matter what, the rules of this theory, you have to follow them. They are absolute. You cannot ever stray from them. The word always is very, very key in a deontological theory, okay? You got to do the right thing always. That is your sense of duty. You cannot ever stray from that sense, okay? You have to follow the rule always. You can't make exceptions. So that's a deontological theory. And then we have a different kind of theory. We have utilitarian theories. Utilitarianism is a ethical viewpoint. You can be a utilitarian. And the utilitarians, they consider, well, the utility of their actions. So that's the word that is useful, part of the word again. Utilitarians consider the utility of whatever this argument is all about. And utility for us will mean good or happiness, something like that. How much good can this thing produce? How much happiness can it produce for the masses? Okay, not just for us, for everybody in total. And these are the two theories that we'll look at today, and we'll keep those in our minds for the rest of the class. There are other kinds of theories, though, like if you've taken a history or a social studies kind of class, you've probably come across the idea of natural rights, like Locke and Hobbes and all those names, if those are ringing a bell. They propose the idea of natural rights, right? The idea that we are born with some fundamental rights just by virtue of being born, by virtue of being humans. And we have access to those things, and they should never be taken from us. Those are natural rights. Cannot take them away, and that can help you argue a topic as well. But we're going to focus on deontology and utilitarianism in this class. And then finally, all of these viewpoints are just viewpoints. They're ways of framing the question so that you can think about them yourself critically, okay? You have to think about them. They don't tell you an answer. They just tell you a way of thinking. And I'll try and highlight that. So yeah, each idea, each viewpoint is valid, is just as valid as the next. Okay? They can each be equally valid and can also be combined, believe it or not. So, yeah, you can't just say, this is what deontologists, God, that's a long word. This is what deontologists believe, and therefore I believe it too. No, you have to argue your topic still. This is just a way of framing the topic. Okay? So those are a lot of words. Are there any questions before I show you our standard deontological theory? It's called Kantianism. A lot of philosophy today. So, okay, let's go here. Here is Kant. His name is Immanuel Kant. He lived a long time ago, and he came up with this idea of deontology. Okay, deontology, again, a rule is a rule. Again, the ethical theory stems from the idea of duty. A rule is a rule. It must always be followed. You can never stray from it. This is what Kant thought, all right? You must act in a way that you would always want others to act. Act in a way that you would want others to always act. That word is key, always. Okay? I'll underline it for emphasis. You get no special exceptions for yourself. You can't act in a different way than you would want others to act. Okay? Golden rule kind of thing. He also framed his idea in this bullet, and he argued that these two bullets are equivalent, among other things. There are some other bullets that I'm not showing you as well. You can read your book if you're interested in that, or look them up on Wikipedia. Another thing that he thought was, do not treat humans as just a means to an end. Treat them as humans that have wants and needs and things. Don't try to just step all over them. Okay? And he argued that these two bullets actually meant the exact same thing. Maybe if you think about it long enough, you can convince yourself of that. But again, it's just an argument. So this is probably the bullet that we're going to care about most in this class when we look at an ethical theory. We're going to think about, is this true? Is this something that we would always want to have happen? Okay? That's Kantianism in a nutshell. There is a problem with all of these ethical theories. They always break down somewhere, and that's why you can't just consider them as the final answer. A problem with Kantianism is you can't have any exceptions to this rule. Like, you can never stray from whatever Kantianism tells you to do. Okay? Again, always. Never forget the always. Okay, any questions about this slide? I do have an example in 2 slides. Feel free to just wait for that. If this is getting weird. But some new words for us today. A lot of those. And it's hard enough for me to pronounce them. So let's talk about just the terms themselves right now. So Kant, he was the man. That's the guy. He's a noun. If you call him by his name, his last name was Kant, Immanuel Kant. His philosophy is Kantianism, okay? Also a noun. His style of philosophy, that's what he thought. He has this specific flavor of deontology, okay? Kantian is the adjective. So that was a Kantian argument. That is how you can describe something, okay? Of pertaining to or resembling the philosophical views of Immanuel Kant. So many big words for us today. So that's the adjective. And then finally, somebody who likes Kantianism, who follows their rules, who thinks as Kant would, is a Kantianist. Okay? That's another noun. Proponent of Kantianism. So hopefully this will help you keep the words straight on your essays. So I'm going to force you to say his name a few times. Now we know. All right? So those are the terms, and I want to give you a standard example when you first learn about Kantianism. You learn about it in a philosophy class. They would teach you this, so I'm going to teach it to you too. So let's talk about lying. Kant would definitely be opposed to lying, right? Because he would ask the question, given his theory, I want you to act in a way that you would want others to always act, no special exceptions. He would ask the question, should everyone always lie? And of course the answer is no. I don't think anybody can argue the opposite, right? So yeah, no way. Everyone should always tell the truth then. That's how it should be. That's what Kantianism proposes. That's what Kantianists would say. This does break down, though, because you get no special exceptions. Sometimes it's a good idea to lie, I would say. I think we've all been in situations where that's possible. Let me give you just the silliest example that people like to give. So let's say here is a house. Let's say this is my house. Boop. And, I don't know, here's the front door. here is me in the house, and here is some serial killer, okay? Serial killer outside my house, and the serial killer knocks on the door, and let's say my mom answers or something. Let's pretend I'm living at home, and the serial killer asks my mom, I'm here to kill Lawton. He first says that. I'm here to kill Lawton. Where is he? And so I think everybody would want to lie at this point. Like, wouldn't my mom say, oh, he's nowhere near here right now. He's at school. Something like that, even though I am home, right? So this is one of those places where Kantianism kind of breaks down. But there's also a possibility that Kantianism was the right answer, because maybe I overhear, here's a window, I overhear the door, and I hear the serial killer, and maybe my mom lies, like, oh, he's outside, when I'm really in the house, and that gives me time to run away, maybe. But I hear this conversation, I hear this question, and then I start running, and I jump out the window, right? And then suddenly, my mom lying, she's now an accomplice in my death, because the serial killer is going to go look outside first. So maybe my mom should have told the truth, saying that I'm inside while I jump out the window. So that's Kantianism. You probably would want to lie here, but technically, there's a possibility of even following the rules would get me killed. Okay? And then we meet each other there and I die. Any questions about that? Just this is the idea. These two bullets are the most important bullets on this slide, I would say. Kant would always be opposed to lying, and the reason is because he would ask that question, should everyone always lie? Is that something I want everybody to do all the time? The answer is of course no. Okay. So that's an example of Kantianism. Are we ready for utilitarianism? No, the idea is you want everybody to always follow this rule. Like if you're considering lying, should anyone ever lie? The answer is no, because you ask the question, should everyone always lie? If you ask the question, should you steal? You would then ask the question, should everyone always steal? And then that would be how you view the topic. Yeah, that's the idea, because they never will anyway. It's just, this is a way of breaking down a question so that you can come up with the answer that's right for you. Yeah. There's no way of like making everybody do the same thing, if only. But that's how Kantianism wants us to think about the problem. Yeah, this is just a way of thinking about the problem. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions before we move on to utilitarianism? All right, so utilitarianism, a big proponent of utilitarianism was John Stuart Mill. I don't think he was the first person to be all about it, but he made it pretty popular, so we'll focus on him. Utilitarianism is all about utility. And so it's about focusing on not what everybody should always do, but focusing on the consequences of the question, on the consequences of your actions, essentially. Because usually the question is about you, the ethical question. What should you do? And so utilitarianists, they measure their actions in terms of the utility, and utility can be defined in different ways. Usually it's like, how much happiness can this produce? How much pleasure can it produce? Those are all synonyms for good, right? That's what utilitarianists look for when they're weighing their options. Okay, so the goal of utilitarianism, when they're faced with an ethical challenge, is they try to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. That's very important. They weigh all the possibilities, like here's that little scale of possibilities, and they make sure that one outweighs the other for the greatest number of people. You don't just consider the question from your point of view. You consider the question from the point of view of everybody who is involved. Does that make sense? You don't get special exceptions just for yourself. You have to determine the consequences for everybody all at once. And I'll give you an example of that. Okay. So yeah, again, utilitarianism utilitarianism likes to break down, there are some problems with it, just like there are problems with Kantianism. You have to go and enumerate every possible consequence of your action, and that's really hard. You can't do that all the time. It's like the butterfly effect, right? Some silly thing might cause some weird action to happen that we could never have predicted. So that's really hard to do. You have to try your best. And then also, no one person, the rights of any individual, does not matter at all. Because it's always the greatest good for the greatest number. Nobody, no special person, like you cannot make any exceptions for the president. Their life is no more important than anybody else's. Right? That is how utilitarians feel. All right? Any questions about this before I give you an example? Again, this is another way of framing a problem. What would the utilitarianists think? And that gives you some, I guess that gives you something to use when you're writing your own argument. You can either bash what they might think or prop it up. So here's my example, and this should help you in your essay. This is the standard question that utilitarianists like to ponder when it's first introduced. So here is the question. Should you kill one person to save 50? And the question is always, what's the best thing? What produces the greatest good? Usually, utilitarians would say, oh, I know the answer immediately. 50 is greater than 1. We're going to save the 50, so let's kill that one person. Done. Does that make sense? Greatest good for the greatest number. That is their answer. They don't even have to think. And so it's your job in an essay to decide, is that a good way of thinking about this particular problem? Maybe Kantianism would help here. Kantianists might have a better idea. Let's think about that too. It's just another way of framing the problem. But again, you have to determine the consequences. Again, nobody's life, rights of individuals don't matter at all. So we don't really care about that. We're not trying to save the children or something. It's just every life is equal kind of thing, if you consider them to be normal people. But other option, what if that one person was like on the verge of curing cancer? Because then the scales change, don't they? That would save billions of people over time, right? So then maybe we should kill the 50. You see how that works? You have to think about these things. You have to think about all the possibilities. You want to produce the greatest good for the greatest number, however you can. Okay? That's the goal. Any questions about this example? So you might see me commenting on your essay if you've already turned it in. Oh, this was a very utilitarian argument. This was a very Kantian argument. Something like that. I like to do that for this first essay. All right. Because maybe you were thinking about this, so you just didn't know the name. Now you know the name. Are we good to continue? So I have a very silly example, and then we'll talk about computer science as applied to these ethical theories. All right. So yeah, these are just ways to approach an argument, right? We're looking at this question from the lens, or through the lens of Kantianism, through the lens of utilitarianism. And that gives us some stuff that we can use in our essay to either knock down or support, right? We need to then assess what those theories say, and that helps start an inner debate that we can then use to write a good essay with. Okay? Does that make sense? These theories don't give you an answer, they give you a way of looking at the problem. That's the idea. All right? So with that, let's do this in full. Let's talk about how Kant would think about Pokemon. Let's talk about how utilitarianists might think about Pokemon, because why not? That's my best example. So if you are not a millennial and you have never thought about Pokemon before, let me just give you an idea of what Pokemon is all about. I thought I'd have to do that in a class, but here we go. If you've never seen Pokemon before, it's just some world where you have these tiny little monsters like Pikachu, and you collect them, and you have them fight other tiny little monsters, and the goal is to become the Pokemon Master. That is the idea. So you're kind of using these things these little creatures to gain not wealth, but acclaim, I would say. So That's an ethical kind of question to ponder. Should we live in a world like this? If we lived in the Pokemon world, should we be training these Pokemon to fight each other, kind of thing? Okay? You got to catch them in the wild, just like they were animals. So let's think about this. Let's think about Pokemon from the perspective of Kantianism. So again, we want to act in a way that we would want others to always act, no special exceptions. All right. So when you see Kant, when you see his name, you better think always. So first ethical question. Should we always try to take Pokemon out of the wild, domesticate them, and force them to fight each other? And I think Kant would definitely say no here because he's for individual rights. We shouldn't step on anybody. We shouldn't use anybody as a means to an end. No special exceptions for you just because you want to be the Pokemon master, right? That's the kind of idea that he would think about. Kant is for individual rights in general because of those bullets on that slide. So he'd probably say no to this. Okay, we can think about this from the utilitarian's perspective on the next slide. But flip side, because we have to consider everything, wouldn't it be true that these Pokemon, these tiny little creatures, would have a better life if we always domesticated them? That's usually true for animals in the wild. The domesticated ones live longer. There's a concept of leveling up in Pokemon as well, and that makes them stronger. So animals in our world live longer in captivity. That's a pro. Con, they wouldn't be as free to roam around. They'd have to follow us. We'd have to keep them trapped in little Pokeballs. And last pro, well, they can probably get to a higher level with us than they would get in the wild, and maybe that would help them attain their own personal goals if they had them. So these are the kinds of things you would have to think about, even though you'd say Kant would probably say no. That starts the debate. Do you see how that's working? That gives us this fuel to start asking these questions. Like, all right, what is the best answer here? Okay, this is also kind of a utilitarian idea as well, because we think about this from the perspective of the Pokemon. Won't they have a nicer life? Even though Kant says this. Okay? And that's how you write an essay. You see how I'm doing that? That's how we're using his idea to fuel the debate. Okay? Again, another ethical question. Should we always use Pokemon to further our dream of catching them all and becoming Pokemon masters? Again, Kant would say no. That's us using them as a means to an end. But again, you could play this game of pro-con now that you know what Kant might think. Because now you're forced to think about this in a certain way, and that helps you come up with ideas. All right? And then there's some kind of terrorist group that's in the Pokemon world. They're called Team Rocket. Should we work together to eliminate them? And I think Kant would probably say yes. Should we catch Pokemon and train them so we could fight Team Rocket? Maybe that's a good argument in favor of domesticating them. Because Kant would probably ask the question, should we always be trying to prevent harmful things from happening to ourselves and to others? Yeah, totally. So that's another way of framing the same question where Kant would say something different. There is no right answer, but this is how you come up with your ideas and you write an essay. Again, this is very hard to train you to do, and that's why I'm giving you a bunch of examples. Are there any questions about this slide for the silly Pokemon example of Kantianism? Evaluating Pokemon using Kantianism. All right, let's try this with utilitarianism now. We have John Stuart Mill coming up to the bat. So when you hear his name or you hear utilitarianism, you think utility, right? Think utility. Right? Just like you think always with Kant, you think utility with Mill. And so now we would think about the questions in a different way. What do we gain from catching and owning Pokemon? What do they lose? Because you have to weigh that. Weigh the good for us and for them, right? So it's usually a pro-con list when it comes to Mill. The Pokemon, they're less free now. They're not able to roam around in the wild, and maybe that decreases their total utility. They would be happier playing among themselves, right? A pro maybe would be, though, again, we get to level them up if we force them to fight other Pokemon. They allow us to rise up in status, which might be good for both of us. Like, they get access to those, I don't know if you've ever seen the anime before, but there's like little Pokemon resorts. You got to pay for those, so can't go to those in the wild unless you break in. So maybe they'll be treated better in the end. And that's a pro. And you have to weigh that. And that's how you start your essay. You see that? It's just a way of thinking about the problem. It's not giving you the answer, it's just a way of thinking about the problem. Again, another question, is it a good thing to even level up a Pokemon, having them rise up in status? Because that involves forcing them to fight other Pokemon, right? So a pro is, well, it's probably making them healthier, like that's their gym. That is actually a word in the Pokemon universe. And then the con to that would be like, is it really a good thing to make Pokemon fight each other? Somebody's getting hurt at the end of the day. Luckily, there's universal healthcare in the Pokemon world, but still, it's gotta hurt. So again, it's a pro-con list, and you'll have to come up with a bunch, and then you'll have to weigh them. That's a way of coming up with an argument in your essays. Okay? That's how John Stuart Mill might view the Pokemon universe. Were he alive today? Any questions about this? Hopefully that gives you a flavor for how you might go about writing an essay and brainstorming your ideas and your arguments. Are we good to move on? Because now I have like a real topic that we're all familiar with, I hope. Are we ready to talk about piracy? Well, let's do it. Stealing stuff virtually. So let's talk about piracy as well as a fancy term called intellectual property, because when you pirate something on the internet, there is usually this term deep down. You are violating somebody's intellectual property a lot of the time. Okay? So I'll try and answer these questions in this last little subsection for us today. Well, let's see. Let's learn a bit about the history of piracy on the internet, because that's going to help us. Let's learn about why it's so hard to stop piracy. Why does it keep happening if it's a thing that not a lot of people who make stuff want? And then how do our ethical theories apply to piracy? What would Kant say about this? What would Mill say about this? Try to think about that in the back of your head. By the time I get to the slide, you might have some thoughts. All right? So let's first talk about intellectual property. Okay? Intellectual property, if you look it up, that word just means, all right, intellectual property is a creative work, something that somebody has made, usually an artist, but you cannot touch that thing, okay? You cannot touch that work. It's virtual, like it's a program, or it's a website, or it's a logo, or it's a song, something like that. You can't really touch it, but it exists, and there's ways to protect against it being stolen, right? You copyright something, you patent something, you trademark it, trade secrets. You write software and you don't give away the source code. You write music and you give away the sound, but you don't tell anybody how exactly to play it. You don't give the sheet music out, okay? So that's a way to keep your intellectual property to yourself for the most part, okay? And that brings us to a very interesting question regarding piracy of intellectual property. If it's not physical, this thing that you're stealing is not physical, what does that mean even to steal it in the first place? Should we be treating stealing or copying intellectual property, because usually stealing is copying it from somebody else, right? Should we be treating that the same as you stealing something in real life? Because in real life, you steal a bag of money, if you steal a bag of money from the bank, then the bank does not have that bag of money anymore, right? That's a bit of a problem. They're going to come after you for that. But if you download something off the internet, you're just copying it from somebody else. That's the equivalent of taking a bag of money and making a second bag of money. Do we see the difference? It's not the same as stealing in real life. And maybe it should be treated a little bit differently. Maybe we shouldn't call it stealing even. Food for thought. And then the joke back in the day was you wouldn't download a car, and the joke answer was I would if I could. All right, let's learn about how piracy used to happen. Maybe, depending on your age, you may have heard of this if you've Wikipedia'd the topic, or maybe you were alive at the time. I was not really on the internet when Napster was a thing, but I know of it. So I think the very first popular piracy software was called Napster. Maybe we've heard of that before. And the idea was people would download this little program. This is ancient Mac OS. They would download it, they would open it, and it would start sharing all of the things that they had on their hard drive, whatever folders they gave access to for this program. And then people could connect to other people's computers and start searching for what they have and downloading it. So what's mine is yours kind of feeling, okay? And this is called peer-to-peer file sharing because of that. Somebody else on their computer is a peer, just like you are peers with each other in this class. You're not connecting to some big giant website. You're connecting to just some other person like you, their computer, and you're accessing their stuff. You're copying their files. Okay, peer-to-peer file sharing. They got sued way back when, and they ended up shutting down in 2001. They rebranded as like some sort of music buying software, but they never really gained their status. That's Napster. Okay, the first real example of peer-to-peer file sharing. I would say you're connecting to somebody else's computer, downloading their stuff. Okay, so again, definitely illegal to create this program. It got shut down. All right. Next program. After Napster came LimeWire. Maybe we've heard of that. Again, it's a peer-to-peer file sharing service. It lasted a little bit longer. Again, same interface. You're sharing the stuff on your computer with other people. Maybe you found the same thing among a bunch of different people and you can download it from them faster because of that. You can connect to multiple people at once, download the same file in pieces. This is all one big network. You're connected to a bunch of individual computers and you're searching through them. So as you open up this program, it would connect you to the LimeWire network, and then your computer would be able to be searched through. You could copy stuff off of it. All right, so that was just another copy of Napster, I would say. And the funny thing about LimeWire is different from Napster is they offered a pro version of their software, and that cost money. You could connect a bit faster, download a bit faster for more people, and the ultimate irony was that you could use the free version of LimeWire, and you would search for LimeWire Pro, and then you could download it. So that was hilarious back in the day. So that's LimeWire. And let's look at this kind of file sharing through the lens of Kantianism and utilitarianism now. You could use either one of these to argue both sides. I want to just highlight that for you here. So, all right, what would Kant ask? He would always say the word always in his question, but what would he ask? He'd say something like, should you always be able to share content with people, and where that content would otherwise cost money, right? That would be the question that Kant would ask. He'd use the word always, of course, and you could answer this in two different ways, which are equally valid. You just have to argue your point, okay? Talk about why you picked that side. Kant might say yes, because he might think that nothing should have been copyrighted in the first place. People are better off just having access to all this stuff. It would make the world a better place. Everything should have been free. Kant the communist or something. So that is one thing that he might have said. Equally valid to say no. Like, no, Kant would say no because if I were an artist, I wouldn't want this to happen to me because I would make less money. People not downloading things and buying them or streaming on Spotify or something, then I don't have access to the revenue from that. And then I don't have as much money. Maybe I have to stop being an artist. So there are two equally valid answers to this question. Kant might say either. Do we see that? You can use his views to prove anything. Your job is to say, oh, he would say yes, and I think that too, and here's why no is the wrong answer, or vice versa. That's what I want you to get doing to be able to do in your essays. Okay, so Kant would ask the word always in his question, and then Mill would say, all right, the utilitarian perspective, what would make the most people happy? Should we have piracy? Well, what provides the most utility, right? So the pro to piracy is, of course, millions of people who cannot afford this album that they're trying to listen to. Usually it was music back in the day, so that's why I'm using it as an example. Millions of people who can't buy this album or pay for a Spotify account, now they're suddenly able to enjoy this artist's music. And there's a million people is a lot more than this one artist. So it's definitely better to have piracy. And even so, maybe those who maybe can pay later, once they get a job or something, they might end up paying the artist after they've tried out listening to their music. Maybe stealing the music is the only way that they would have ever found this artist, because they didn't know if they would like them yet. That is a valid argument using utilitarianism. That's a valid pro, right? You could just as easily say, no, this is a bad idea. Utility is the total utility is horrible because the artist might end up losing so much money because you can't track the listening of somebody who's stolen their album. They lose all this money. They're not making enough with live shows, and now they just suddenly have to give up being an artist. They can't make any more music. And that might make all of their fans sad, and there's more fans usually than pirates of that same music. So in total, the utility is down, and that means that piracy shouldn't exist. Do you see how I'm weighing that? And you could go either way. That's how you look at these topics. Okay? Any questions about that? I'm just giving you examples of how I want you to think in when I ask you future questions or in your future essays. Is it slowly starting to sink in? Make a bit more sense with each example? I hope so. So yeah, it's very hard to teach somebody to think in a certain way, and that's what I have to try to do for this lecture. All right, present day, we have probably the most popular form of file sharing is called BitTorrent. Have we heard of that before? It's definitely around these days. And the issue with BitTorrent, it's very hard to get rid of BitTorrent because it's, whereas LimeWire, Napster, you have to start them up, and they would connect to bigger servers somewhere for a second, and that would give them a list of all the people who were logged in, things like that. There was a bit of centralization, even though it was still peer-to-peer. For BitTorrent, there is no real centralization. There's a bunch of things called trackers, and those tell you all the people who have this file, and it's just, you can't really shut all of them down at once. You really are just talking to individual computers with BitTorrent. Also, BitTorrent in general is just a file-sharing protocol. You know about protocols. That's the HTTPS on your website. That's just a protocol. It's a means of connecting to this computer across the internet that serves my class's website, that serves Canvas, that serves Zoom. So just like you have HTTP, optionally with an S in it, // you also have FTP. That's not popular these days anymore, but there's a bunch of different protocols, and BitTorrent is just another one of those. Just a way of connecting to a computer. Just multiple computers at once, really. It's just a way of transferring information on the internet, and so you can't really disallow BitTorrent, just like you can't really disallow somebody connecting to a website. That would be silly and impossible. You would have to shut down all of the ways that people use to get that initial list of all the people with this file, so that I can connect to them and download things. So all of those websites, those eventually do get shut down, but because it's just a protocol, others can pop back up and start serving the same file. Not a big deal, okay? Finally, BitTorrent is not just used for piracy. Here is a screenshot of a BitTorrent program downloading something that is very large, but is very free as well. It's a free operating system. It's a Linux distribution. So BitTorrent is used to make it so that you can download things faster. Maybe you can't upload very quickly, but if 50 people have this file, I can connect to all 50 of them and download it super quickly. That's what BitTorrent's all about. And it's used for, companies legitimately use it for sharing things faster than they have an upload speed to give to people, right? Faster than they could potentially share it themselves. So it's not just used for bad stuff. It's just a protocol. And that's why you can't really shut it down. That's my spiel. Any questions about that? That's piracy. That's intellectual property. That's where we are today. All right. So I have one last question for us that is still part of the piracy topic, still part of the intellectual property topic, and it's very close to our hearts. So here's my last major ethical question for us today. Should you download a textbook without paying for it? Woohoo! So let's think about this, okay? I would like you, I'm eventually going to get you into groups on the next slide, but I would like you to think about, in your mind, before I send you there, what are some common arguments for stealing textbooks and against stealing textbooks? Think about, what are they assuming as well? What are the assumptions behind those arguments? Because that's another thing I want you to get at. I want you to explicitly state and figure out. Okay, so I'm going to give you a question about this on the next slide. And something that would be very, very helpful for you as you come up with your arguments is, what would our boys say about this? What would Kant say? What would he be asking? What would he be concluding? What would Mill say? What would he be concluding? Okay, so here is my question for you. Let's start us off this way. So please go to, not the ByClicker page, but the written ICE page. I want you to write something this time. So go here, let me clean it out from my previous classes. Whee! And so as you work in groups with the people close to you, here's how you'll figure out which of these cells to fill in. So you'll be like, I'm group 1, I'm going to type stuff. This is my answer, okay? That's where you're going to type, but here's how you figure out what group you're in. Here's the map of this room. I worked very hard on it. So here's the front of the room, and here are all the computers. I have numbered the computers since I don't think they actually have numbers. So here's the front door. So this first row right here, this would be computer number 0 way over there in the corner, okay? That's the idea. And so you just run down this. Here are the TVs as well. And then here are the numbers of all these computers and the back door. So use those, and let's say that your group number is the minimum group number among all of your group members. So if this row is working together, then your group number would be 0. That's the minimum number of everybody working in. Okay? That just gives us a way of figuring out which cell to fill in, and we don't like mess with anybody else's. Okay, so that's how you'll fill this stuff in. But here's my question for you. So should you download textbooks without paying for them? That's your ethical question. And here is how I want you to do this debate. So I'm going to give your group a stance, okay? I'm going to say that every odd-numbered group has to say, yes, you should be able to do this, okay? Should you download textbooks without paying for them? If you're an odd group, your answer is yes. I'm forcing you to think that way. If you're an even group, your answer is no. I'm forcing you to say otherwise, okay? And so I would like you to come up with as many arguments as you can for your stance, the stance that I'm giving you. Okay, I'm forcing you to think in a way that you maybe don't think. So take a little while to, as a group, come up with some arguments and put them in the first section of this Google Doc. And then later we'll come back and I'll have you write counter arguments to your own arguments. But I want to give you some time for each of those. So just do this first part now. Write up as many arguments as you can think of. If you'd like to write multiple lines, you can say blah, 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 and then you can press either Control-Enter or Alt-Enter or Option-Enter, and then you have more lines here. Another line, Control-Enter, another line, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's how you can do that. If you're interested and you want to write multiple lines like that, and like little bulleted lists. But that is my question. Are there any questions about this question? I'm giving you a stance. I would like you to come up with as many arguments as you can for your stance, given your group number and what I'm telling you to do. So just come up with the arguments right now. We'll deal with counter arguments after we come back and look at the arguments. Okay? All right, be free. I'll give you like, I don't know, 4 minutes to come up with some arguments. And then I'll give you time for counter arguments as well. Maybe we'll discuss them at the very end. Remember, I'm forcing you to think in this way. You can't say no. If you're an odd group, you can't say no. I think 4 minutes is a good amount. All right, that's my timer. So continue your discussions. What I'd like you to do now, we'll come back to them later. I see some nice things being written here. I would like you now to take those arguments that you just wrote, and then in the second column, like over here, response part 2, I would like you to come up with counter arguments to your own arguments. How would somebody else bash those down that you just wrote? Take another 3 minutes to try that for as many of your arguments as you can, and then we'll come back. One more minute about. Get your thoughts in. All right. So let's come back in the last few minutes of class. Let's look at these. I think we only have time for one group. Is there any group who feels very strongly about what they wrote and would like to talk about their arguments? Otherwise, I'll pick one at random. And then I need to make sure there's enough time to release your next writing assignment. So yeah, let's take a look at, I don't know, nice middle of the road one. Let's try group 29. So odd group said, yes, we should be able to steal textbooks. Let's take a look at these arguments. You should download textbooks without paying, since to begin with, textbooks should be free. That's right, you're already paying for your classes. Why shouldn't that include maybe the price of the textbook? You're paying enough money, so it's an argument in terms of money. Very nice. Yes, that is. Why should you waste your money if you're already? Why should you pay extra if you're already paying for a textbook? And then the flip side of that would be, don't know how that happened. Pirating is morally wrong. Someone spent time to write the textbooks, and for someone to just take their work free of charge is a complete wrongdoing. Yeah. So that would be a good counter argument. Pirating is wrong. You are hurting the author of that textbook, maybe also monetarily, right? There's a flip side to that. So yeah, I like these. No, because there will no longer be a monetary push to make more textbooks. Yeah, so great job, Group 36. There will probably less people want to write textbooks, and they're kind of important for classes. And nobody's going to want to write a textbook if it costs, or if everyone's just going to steal it, right? And then the counter argument to that could be whatever this is saying. Let's say, I think that the primary person. Yeah, the primary purpose of a book is to share knowledge, and knowledge should be free. That's a very good thought. I like this. Yeah, so we're getting practice with thinking a certain way, maybe a way that we do not think, and then countering that way. What would somebody say if they were trying to argue against us? All right, so here are my silly arguments, and I'm sure you might see some of the things that I said in these and some of the things that you wrote in these. So here's some arguments for stealing textbooks. Like the publisher probably charging you way too much money. That's unfortunate. Like textbooks should have been cheaper. They shouldn't be making that much money off of them. Maybe they should charge a little bit, but not a ton. And the assumption off of that is that maybe the publisher does have control over that price, and they are totally extorting us. Like they're trying to make as much money as possible. We don't like that. A counter to that is like, okay, some books are produced at cost. Like if it's a color book, it's going to cost $40, and the author isn't really getting any money from that. It's just the printing cost at that point. So some textbooks are a good price. Maybe you should give back and buy them because maybe the author gets $1 or something. Maybe that's okay. All right. An argument against would be, well, something that we've said, the author should be rewarded for their efforts. That would be nice. And the assumption for that is, why should the authors be rewarded? Well, they did a good job when they wrote the book. I think we've read some textbooks probably in our lifetimes that are just horribly written. That should not have been, we shouldn't be giving anybody money for those. Okay? So it's not true when the book doesn't help you, or you don't like what the author's made. And then you could give this idea to Kant and to Mill. Kant might ask, should we always steal a textbook? And again, he could say yes or no. Like, yes, knowledge should always be free. That's something that he might think. Or no, again, this hurts the authors. It's not fair. If I were an author, I wouldn't want a book stolen from me. Again, you think about it in that way. Kant could say yes or no. And then finally, Mill would say, well, is this a good thing? Do we get utility out of doing this, out of stealing a textbook? and you make your pro-con list. Mill might say, yes, it saves money, increases utility because people have more money to spend on the economy or something because we're about to go into a recession. So yeah, the stealers are far greater than the authors, so we should care about them more, let's say. And again, you could turn that around and say, no, it hurts the authors, that ruins the utility because maybe we'll never have textbooks ever again if nobody wants to write them because they know they're not going to make any money. Okay? Any questions about that? I know we have, 2 minutes left. I'll give you a minute for a question if you'd like. So I want the last minute to talk about your next essay because you have one due this week. I want to release your next one. All right? This essay is aptly named College is Useless. It's going to be due week 4. So that's August 30th. Oh, man, do I really not have... There we go. August 30th, which is going to be not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday after that. That's your essay due date. I'll try to keep. Let's go back to that. Here's what I want you to do. I have just released it. It's due week 4. It's going to be a 750-word essay. So I was building you up to this point. All right. Your essay is the following. I want you to argue this, even if you don't believe it. I want you to argue that college is useless and not worth going to. That is your prompt. You are forced to argue that. You must argue that that statement is true, even though you're sitting in this class right now. Okay? You probably don't completely agree since you are sitting in this class right now, but you need to learn how to look at things from the opposite way, from the opposite perspective. You have to say that college is useless. You have to argue this. You can't say no. I'll give you a 0 if you say no. Okay? So, here's your requirement. You can structure your essay however you want. Write it in whatever style you'd like. But here's the one thing you must include as well as arguing this, of course. You must mention the Kantian and utilitarian viewpoints. You have to tell me what Kant would think and what Mill would think. And you better explain why they would think that. Okay? You can use those for your argument, or you can bash them down for your argument. Okay? So maybe, for example, if Kantianism says exactly what you're trying to say, you'll use it as proof. Or if it says something that you would not be arguing, that you're not trying to argue, then you better argue why your argument, which is against Kantianism apparently, why that's still correct in spite of what Kant might say. Okay? And then you can read the style thing. I don't really care about style, but that's all. That is your next essay. Do you have any questions about that? Hopefully that's self-explanatory, but that is your next essay. Please read the style guide, and you're just going to submit as a PDF or paste your essay in. And that's class. We ended right on time. So I'll see you next time.